What's up, horror fans? Happy Labor Day! And as a labor of love, Danny and I are talking about a show that just appeared on our favorite streaming service. We're talking about Horror's Greatest. And if I know one person that can appreciate Horror's Greatest, and we're talking about the tropes this time around, it's my good friend over there, Dr. Zayas God, Danny Torkel. Danny, we like to talk about shows where people talk about horror, don't we?
We do. And Shudder has a great history of doing these types of shows. In fact, the EP of this show, Kurt Sayenga, he also did the 101 scariest horror movie. Was it 101 scariest horror movie moments? Or yes, it was. I see your ticker. And we had a blast covering that, going like moment by moment. And what I like about this show, Horror's Greatest, is that I didn't really know Horror's Greatest is that's a kind of an ambiguous title.
Yeah.
But then each episode kind of goes and picks out one specific thing about the genre and goes into it. And I really dug this first episode. Charlotte watched it with me. She absolutely loved it, and she was upset because they didn't upload the entire series. She wanted to binge through these, and she's very nervous. My daughter is starting high school on Thursday.
Oh boy.
But luckily for her, episode 2 of this comes out tomorrow. As of we are recording on Labor Day, Monday. Episode 2 comes out tomorrow. They come out every Tuesday for the next, I think it's 5 to 7 weeks.
Yeah.
And based on this first episode, this is going to be probably the highlight of my week each week. It was just so refreshing to see the way they structured this episode. I loved all the talking heads. It's funny. A couple of the talking heads are people that I'm actually, familiar with, that I actually get to see,
Yes.
kind of on a semi-regular basis. And so it was very exciting to watch this and go through the tropes and the cliches that we grew up with as kids born in the early 80s, when those tropes and cliches were really hitting home.
Yeah, exactly. The format is great. We've grown up watching things like this. There were shows like this back in the day when we just had cable, and it was just a great way to kind of see all the similarities between horror movies. And this first episode is a great way to start, where they just talk about tropes that we all know by heart, that we kind of come to anticipate when we watch horror movies. Like you said before, there's a bunch of great talking heads on this show. Right off the bat, they start off that Joe Hill is the first guy they start off with. And Joe Hill, I used to say Joe Hill was my favorite author, but I really haven't read anything by him in, I don't know, maybe a decade at this point. So, but Joe Hill was my favorite author for a really long time. I was really happy to see him on there. He had some really good.
He certainly knows his way through familial connections to a trope or two. In the horror genre. For those of you who might be living under a rock, Joe Hill is, of course, the son of Stephen King and Tabitha King. And so the man has grown up basically encased in horror from the time he was a child. But yeah, I saw you have Bree Grant, Alex Winter. You have writers, you have directors, you have people who work in the horror scope. You have people who work in horror education. You have one of the guys I noted down, Ben Scher, was a PhD. You have people from all over the horror community. Going as far back as people like Tom Holland, who you've interviewed on this channel, who wrote and directed Fright Night, who directed the original Child's Play, who wrote Psycho 2. You have Kate Siegel, Mike Flanagan's muse, and who is making her directorial debut in a segment of the latest VHS movie, which I believe is coming to Shudder soon. I think it is. And then you have, I have to shout out Ted Gagan was on here. Ted hosts probably the best horror trivia in New York City, Final Exam Trivia at the Rock Bar. The next one of those, by the way, is September 18th. So if you live in New York City, come out to Final Exam Trivia. Jen Wexler, who directed The Ranger and The Sacrifice Game. A couple days after I watched this, I was at the IFC Center in Manhattan for a screening of Red Rooms, which might be my favorite movie of the year so far.
Yeah.
And I got to see Jen, and I was like, is that horror's greatest, Jen Wexler? And I've interviewed her years back for Geeks of Doom
Nice.
when she was making The Ranger. But so this is like a laundry list of talking heads, people who are current in the horror community, people who are making horror films right now, who are legends in the horror field, and who have their hands in every aspect of it. So it's great, and I'm sure there's going to be more people who we haven't even seen yet.
Exactly. And so I was worried with the subject matter of horror tropes that they were just going to talk about specific movies and they were going to say a lot of stuff that was kind of obvious. But what made me happy was that they would focus on like a specific movie often and talk about how it kind of transcended the trope or like changed the trope. And so I thought what we could do for the rest of this episode is just kind of go through each trope and kind of give our 2 cents on each one, maybe kind of bring up what was said on the show. But I think that like we are worthy talking heads at this point, having done this for over 3 years. I think we can kind of say our own 2 cents. Imagine if we were on it. Yeah. So trope number 1 that they go through is making stupid decisions. Joe Hill has a great quote. He says, everyone has a plan until Ghostface sticks a butcher knife in your chest. Yeah. Right now, Joe Hill, his point was that horror movie characters make stupid decisions, but if you were in a scenario like the ones that they face, you would make stupid decisions as well. And we all sit in the theater saying like, oh, I would never do that. I would never run up the stairs instead of out the front door. But
I love that for each of these, how they like deconstruct it. Yeah. And I think it was Chad Villea, who's a producer on Scream 5 and 6, who like they showed the killing of Wes, the character of Wes in Scream 5, right, and how they like set that up with like cliche moments, and you're expecting like, oh, all these, he left a door open, there's going to be somebody behind it, and then they finally, like, he closes the door, turns around, and there's the killer. Right. But yeah, making stupid decisions. I think one of the talking heads, it might have been Joe Hill also, who said like, you just kind of have to accept that characters in horror movies are going to make stupid decisions, or else you're not going to have a horror movie.
Right. And I think that some horror movies do a good job of showing why characters would make stupid decisions. Like, I think in our modern age, there's a lot of situations, and I'm surprised this wasn't one of the tropes, was like having no cell phone service or not having access to the phone. But I think that might fall under the making stupid decisions.
They also have the later on, where is it? I'm trying to find it. Number 6, not to jump too far ahead, but like car trouble. It's like car trouble and the cell phone that doesn't work. Yeah, to me are linked. When I think of making stupid decisions, I think of the moment in The Blackening where they're all like, don't say it, don't fucking say it. And it's like, we have to split up. And they're like, no. Yeah. Splitting up is one of the main ones. And I love for The Blackening that's a major part of the end of this episode. Yeah. And that they have the writer-director on there. It was really awesome seeing him talk about his movie and just talk about that trope at the end there too. But like making stupid decisions, for me in horror movies, I don't care if it's a slasher and someone like hides in a stupid place or they go upstairs instead of out the front door. That doesn't bother me in slashers. I think the stupid decision part is when you have people that are like scientists or military people and they do something that's just like totally against their protocol and stupid. Yeah, not to make not if Chris is watching, he'll probably get, because he's the staunchest Prometheus defender that I've ever met. Right. But like Prometheus for me is the classic example of making stupid decisions where it's like, my job is to be the map maker. I get lost in the tunnel.
Right.
My job is to be like I'm scared of this. I don't want to be around this, so I'm going to leave. Oh, look, it's a snake. Let me touch it,
Yeah.
and it gets inside my suit and kills me.
Right.
I also love that a lot of these tropes are tied to the other ones. So it's like making stupid decisions very often goes along with the second one, which we'll get to in a second.
Yeah.
Because like one stupid decision is, wow, it's kind of creepy outside. Let's go out alone and, go have sex somewhere.
Yes.
Or let's go skinny dipping in the lake where there's a legend about a killer who, comes back from the dead. And yeah, so trope 2 is horny teens must die. They go into like the whole Christian symbolism of that, and that becomes obviously the trope of the '80s, starting with the concept of the final girl, which actually does go back to the '70s, but Laurie Strode in Halloween.
Yeah.
She's the virginal one of the group. She survives, and then you get typically, not all the time, but typically whoever the sexless girl is in the Friday the 13th movie, in Nightmare on Elm Street. You think that Tina is going to be the main girl, but then she goes off and has sex with her boyfriend, and she's the first one killed by Freddy. Whereas Nancy is like, no, young Johnny Depp, we shouldn't have sex right now. And she's the final girl that, would define that entire series. So, right. That is obviously a very popular trope that, goes back to the concept of the final girl. And did they make the final girl? Oh, yeah, that goes to, so again, like these kind of link up. Number 10 was the final girl trope, which kind of stems off of the horny teens must die.
Yes, exactly. And so they do talk about how there's like these sort of like these Puritan Christian values in these horror movies where they do kill off these teens that are having sex. Now, one of the great parts of this show was how they talk about how it's all set up, right? Because they talk about how if you make a movie about like a family that goes on a trip to the woods, then all of a sudden you have to like kill a kid and people aren't necessarily comfortable with that. So the dynamic is that you set it up where it's a bunch of teens going together and then you can kill off all the teens, right?
Yeah.
And I just, it's such an obvious thing, but it's just something I didn't really think about until they started talking about it on this show. Now, I've watched many a horror movie where I'm like, just, I was a kid, I was like, oh, I'm so excited to see boobs, And I was trying to think which horror movie has like almost all of these tropes, if not every single one. And I was thinking it has to be one of the Friday the 13th movies, right?
Well,
Because they have them the worst, I think.
Part 5 for me, whenever it is like the go-to, because like the director of Part 5, Danny Steinman, was like kind of like a pornographer, and if you go back and watch New Beginning, there's so much gratuitous nudity. I think that's the movie where there's one scene where the waitress who's being picked up at the restaurant is putting like makeup on in the bathroom, and she's like, wait till he gets a load of these, and she just does that for the camera, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And then there's like one of the more gratuitous sex scenes in the entire Friday series is in Part 5. And it also has some of the nastier kills in that movie too.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, this, what's another interesting thing that they say is they say that Friday the 13th was like the first time they had like a mainstream horror movie that was like made by a major studio, of this caliber, like slasher, like that. And that's interesting because that's really what starts the boom, right? And then it had all those tropes in it. So all of a sudden they're making all these movies that have all these crazy tropes in it. I mean, you just mentioned before Tom Holland and, not Spider-Man Tom Holland, but the director of Child's Play and Psycho 2.
Oh, yeah.
He's in there, and it was really awesome to see him because I did interview him for this channel. If you guys ever want to see a full like hour interview with him, check him out on the Lastercast. But it was cool. He admits like, yeah, we had to put these two teenagers having sex in the basement just to kind of go along with what was expected of horror movies at this point.
Yeah.
So let's go into the next one, which ties into, oh, look, I wrote trope 2 after I wrote trope 2. Okay, so this, I guess, is probably trope 3 then. The sinister conspiracy. So why I liked this one so much is because they tie in my favorite horror movie of all time into this. And they tie 2 movies together, which of course I thought about when I saw the other one, but they tie together Hot Fuzz and the original Wicker Man. And I was like, yep, Hot Fuzz is a lot like the Wicker Man.
It is, strangely. But they also tie in all-time classics like They Live, From Hell, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Midsummer, Rosemary's Baby. Yeah, and what I love about these movies and why I won't even the whole sinister conspiracy trope is that it from the minute these movies start, there's this like overall sense of suspense that isn't normally there in, say, your run-of-the-mill 80s slasher, where you're not really scared of the 80s slasher. You're there for the nudity, you're there for the gratuitous sex, you're there for the graphic violence. It's like, yeah, I can't wait. The sinister conspiracy movie makes you think, makes you paranoid. You don't know who you could trust, and then it usually hits you with some type of gut punch ending. And I noticed that was interesting. A lot of the movies they picked here have a real gut punch ending with the sinister conspiracy, like Midsummer, Rosemary's Baby, They Live, even. Like, you follow Roddy Piper and Keith David for the whole movie. Keith David gets like unceremoniously shot in the staircase. And then Roddy Piper, spoiler for a movie that came out in 1988, Roddy Piper like is shot and is basically dying, and on his like last act on Earth is to like blow up the satellite while he dies.
Right.
Even From Hell, which I don't know, have you seen From Hell?
I've not, and it's based on a comic.
Yeah, and I just actually rewatched it not that long ago. It is brutal. It's fucking great. And I won't spoil it for you, but it's about Jack the Ripper, of course. And so there's this mystery throughout the movie of like who Jack the Ripper is, how deep does this conspiracy go?
Right.
And again, it's like you find out, but it's kind of a gut punch at the end, and then of course they show the infamous ending of Philip Kaufman's remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers with the late Donald Sutherland, and the point of doom at the end.
Yes.
So
I think
the
that
sinister conspiracy movies are, I think they're kind of even a step above just because of how paranoid and intense they are.
Yeah, and I think that it actually might be my favorite horror subgenre. Because, I mean, I already said Wicker Man's my favorite movie. And then every movie that you listed there, I was like, yeah, that's fucking really good. So, I mean, I don't know. I fucking love them. I've never seen this one movie they showed on the show. And I was wondering if you had seen it. Have you seen Race with the Devil?
So I haven't, but it's a movie that I think is on like 7 of my different queues to watch. I always get that confused with The Devil Rides Out, which is a completely different movie starring Christopher Lee.
Okay.
And I actually have The Devil Rides Out on Blu-ray. Race with the Devil I think it's available on streaming. And again, this is where Shudder does these documentary series, and I love them. They did it with 101 horror's greatest moments, scariest moments. And I consider myself a big time horror movie guy. There are movies that I haven't seen. So when I see a movie like Race with the Devil feature very prominently, it's like a trigger for me to say, okay, get on that.
Right. It looked awesome. I mean, it looked kind of just like the Wicker Man, but like in America, like an American road trip, So I want to definitely check it out. If it's on a bunch of streaming channels, I think I can actually watch it for free. The next one is The Cursed Book. Now, of course, they go right away for The Evil Dead. They mentioned the Necronomicon. I was thinking about how, we've talked a lot about Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead reboot. And I was thinking about how, like, that one really drives home the cursed book. I know that like in all the Evil Dead movies, the Necronomicon is a big part, right? But I feel like you really get the sense of like how cursed and how dangerous it is in that remake. What do you think, man?
Oh, I mean, yeah, just the amount of gore and the level of like the nastiness to the violence in that movie ups the ante so much. Whereas like the original Evil Dead it kind of feels like a straightforward possession movie with a lot of extra gore.
Yeah,
I also like that in this section they make a point to say that, as the years go on, the cursed book has become a cursed computer program, like in Evil Speak, or a cursed VHS tape in the VHS series, or The Ring, of course, and how
yeah.
like the cursed book has expanded technologically. Soon there'll be a cursed YouTube channel, and
Maybe it might be us.
yeah, who knows?
We'll make your views go away, you know. But so then besides the and I'm just kind of going through them quickly. Then the next one is Murderous Rednecks. And it's funny because like when you move from New York City to Texas, you kind of feel like, well, that's gonna be my neighbors. I'm just gonna be living around people like this. And I was luckily mistaken. But in this section, they focus a lot on uh Dale and Tucker Must Die, right? Or I don't know, Face Evil.
Tucker and
I like,
Dale versus Evil.
yeah. I kind of like combined, a bunch of movie titles there in one. But I've never seen that movie, and it looked fucking great, just based
Oh,
on,
it's so good.
yeah, yeah,
Charlotte watched that movie and was so annoyed in like the first half of the movie because I don't think she understood what it was. But
yeah,
then once it got to the second half of the movie, she started to absolutely love it. It
yeah.
is easily one of the great horror comedies of all time. Speaking of that, later today, I think Athena, me, and Charlotte are going to see what is probably the greatest horror comedy of all time, the 20th anniversary of Shaun of the Dead in theaters.
Nice.
That is in theaters, I think, for the rest of this week, depending on where you live. I think it's only in AMC theaters for some reason. They were
Yeah,
like, I was getting away with too many movies for free with Regal Unlimited, so now they want me to pay top dollar for a 20-year-old movie. But
yeah.
yeah,
Let's, yeah,
the Murderous Rednecks, of course. You get the Texas Chainsaw movies. You get the I Spit on Your Grave movies. I love that they included Deliverance because that's a movie that some people would not associate with horror, but is absolutely horrific because it can really happen. It feels like a real. It's not like nobody's getting possessed. Nobody's getting, attacked by a masked serial killer. That is something that like feels genuinely real, and it's happening to like adult men, not teenagers, not children. It makes it so much creepier.
yeah.
So I'm glad they included Deliverance.
Yeah, there's a couple of choices in this show where I'm like, oh wow, but then it kind of makes sense. Like I thought that Hot Fuzz kind of was like that too, because they're like, oh, this horror movie, Hot Fuzz. I'm like, yeah, it does have a slasher in it, and it does have that, conspiracy in it. So it fits because Hot Fuzz always kind of feels like a police action buddy cop movie, but it's
Yeah.
multiple things in one. So we can kind of fly through a couple of these because we've already sort of discussed them, but we got that car trouble one. Then we have the old dark house. And what I liked about this one, this is yet another example where they brought up a movie that I'd never seen. And I was actually very interested in it. They had that movie by James Whale where it almost seemed like a spoof on horror
Oh,
movies.
the
Did you
old
see
dark
that?
house.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Have you
Oh,
seen that?
yeah, it's great. It's
Yeah.
it's he made that movie in the 30s, like in between Frankenstein movies, and it's just fantastic. You have a really creepy Boris Karloff, the guy who is the real villain in Bride of Frankenstein. The doctor in Bride of Frankenstein who convinces Frankenstein to make the bride. He's in it as one of the older guys. And here's the funniest thing that I told Charlotte: the young blonde in the old dark house is Gloria Stewart, who is Old Rose in Titanic.
Oh, that's perfect.
The old dark house is fantastic, and then of course, the whole idea of the creepy houses. So you get everything from haunted house movies like Amityville and The Conjuring to just movies that take place in creepy houses like House of the Devil, The Haunting, The Others. Stuart Gordon's Dolls, which is on I think is streaming free on Tubi and is like 75 minutes long and is so fucking good. Um, yeah, it's one of the oldest tropes around because it literally goes back to the 1930s. Dracula takes place in an old castle. Frankenstein and the old dark house and the black cat. That was one of the easiest tropes to do was the haunted house. The haunting of Hill House, and some of the shows that we they kind of started this YouTube channel covering our creepy house trope shows. All the Mike Flanagan Netflix stuff.
Right. One person, I can't remember who it is, but one person during the show says how like the house is a metaphor for ourselves, because we inhabit our houses, it's a part of us. And so when there's like an evil that corrupts the house, it's very personal. It's like the evil is coming to us. And I think it's very interesting that two of Flanagan's shows are literally called like The Haunting of, and then it's the name of the location,
but they're
right? Hill House.
And they're also based on two absolute classic pieces of literature. The Haunting of Hill House, and then the Turn of the Screw.
Yeah.
So they're based on those legends. They're based on those, but then like even things like Midnight Club and the Fall of the House of Usher. There's multiple scary houses in Usher.
Yeah, it even has house in the title. It's fucking great. So let's keep it going. Let's go on to the next trope they talk about. They talk about slow walking serial killers. Obviously, they bring up Michael Myers. Like in this show, you see a lot of shots from Halloween. And it's because like Halloween establishes some of these tropes. We talked about the final girl already. Michael walks slowly. Once again, they show a movie that I have not seen. I know you've seen this movie, but it's the one where it's like the documentary about the slasher.
Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. It is
that looks fucking great.
It is amazing. It's a behind the scenes of like, I'm a serial killer and I'm going to show you how I do it. Follow me with your crew. And I still to this day, I am upset that there hasn't been a sequel. Scott Wilson, who most people will remember from The Walking Dead, he's since passed away, but he's in Behind the Mask, and I met him at a convention years ago, and I remember asking, I was like, I know this is like a Walking Dead festival, but Behind the Mask, man, love that movie, and I'd love there to be a sequel. And he's like, yeah, and he had started to talk about how like it was kind of in the works, and then it just never came to be.
Yeah.
So if you ever get a chance, make sure you see that movie. He basically deconstructs a lot of the tropes and cliches that we're talking about here. I do love that they, in that section, they tie back the slow walking killer to all the way back again to the 30s to the Mummy, who is slowest killer in the world. And then I love that they used Halloween 2 instead of Halloween, because Halloween 2, Michael Myers is walking so slow, he might as well be going backwards in that movie. There's scenes of him where, like, there's one scene in Halloween 2 where Jamie Lee Curtis is in an elevator and he's like 4 feet from the elevator and the door starts to close and he's just like, and he doesn't make it. And I'm like, it's the more I've grown and watched Halloween 2, the more I groan while watching Halloween 2. And I'm almost to the point where I'm just like, can you just walk and get her? She's right there.
Yeah.
Come on.
Oh, man. I know. I love it. But then, like, as a dad, I often do this thing where I, like, play this kind of hide and seek chase kind of game with my kids. And I'll play the Halloween theme to freak them out. Sometimes we'll turn the lights off, too. And I will just walk slowly like Michael to get them. Somehow I'm always able to corner them, I was thinking about that while I was watching this. I love that trope though. And they mentioned how like Michael would look goofy if he was running after people.
Yeah,
So
I
I just
guess.
wanted to knock out two more real quick. I don't think we have to go into super detail about them. Talk about Cabins in the Woods. And of course, there's the example of Cabin in the Woods. That's where they had that great example of like, well, yeah, of course you want to go on a trip with your friends, and then we could just kill off all your friends. I really like that point. We already kind of mentioned the final girl, and now we get to go to the blackening for the last one, where the black character is doomed. This was an interesting one where they talk about the black character is doomed. And of course, they use the example of the black guy that survives from Dream Warriors that dies in the next one, right? What's
Yeah,
that
Ken
character's name?
Sagos, who plays Kincaid in part 3,
Kincaid. Yeah,
and
yeah,
then they friggin' aliens him, and all the other survivors from Dream Warriors in Dream Master.
yeah.
The classic case of this is, of course, Dick Halloran in The Shining,
Shining.
who spends almost the entire movie trying to get back to the Overlook so that he
Yeah,
could literally take an axe to the chest like 5 seconds later.
yeah.
They even go back to, of course, the two big ones, which is Night of the Living Dead and a movie called Spider Baby, which I've never seen. But this is like a perfect tie-in because I am almost done reading a book called The Black Guy Dies First, Black Horror Cinema from Fodder to Oscar,
Oh,
written
wow.
by Robin Armeens Coleman and Mark Harris. And they are two of the main voices for horror noir.
Yeah.
And I love, this is like, we covered that documentary years ago on Shudder, and this is like the perfect compendium to that. And it's
Nice.
so funny because as they're going through Trope 11, which was Black Characters Are Doomed, I'm like remembering all the things that they had mentioned in the book. And apparently they cast this like very well-known black actor in the movie Spider Baby, which came out in, I think, 1968 also, the same year as Night of the Living Dead. And like the black actor is literally there to like stick his head through a window and get killed almost instantly.
Oh
And
my
then, of course, you
God.
have Ben in Night of the Living Dead, played by Dwayne Jones, who is the antithesis of every black character you've ever seen at that point, survives to the very end only to get, shot down by the, hillbilly hordes that are trying to kill all the zombies. So I love that they had Dwayne Perkins. He's the writer of The Blackening. You mentioned him. Tananarive Due, who was a
Yeah.
big talking head on horror noir. She's written
Right.
several books. She was on here for this. And yeah, if you get a chance, this is a great book. I did a book review for our channel about The Future Was Now, about the
Yeah.
sci-fi movies that came out in 1982. I'm about 30 pages left in this. So when I finish this, I'm going to do a short book review about that. And then I got another book that I just got that I'm really excited to get into, which is I Spit on Your Celluloid, which is about the history of women directing horror movies by Heidi Honeycutt. I'm actually reading books, Pete.
I know. I was kind of surprised. Like, you're just whipping out books. Usually, like, you're whipping out mugs and stuff and like Funko Pops. But, like, yeah, it's books. Okay, there's a
But
mug. Okay.
and I'm also on Audible. I have about 2.5 hours left in The Vampire Lestat, which
Whoa.
we're going to cover, do a book review about that to kind of get us back to Interview with a Vampire.
One of our main cash cows. Yes, yes. And I don't mean literal cash. We don't, it's just we get views. So anyway, that is our like half-hour recap of the first episode of Horror's Greatest. I'm actually super excited. We always have a short amount of time to get these recordings in, but I'm very excited to talk about the next episode. And it's all about like giant monsters. I'm a big giant monsters
That's right.
fan.
Yeah.
And then besides that, Danny and I are about to go record our review of Strange Darling. And I've been dying to talk about this movie with Danny since I saw it. So we're going to hop on over to that recording. But you guys make sure that you subscribe to our channel and let us know what is your favorite horror trope too. And we will catch you guys next time.